I was standing at my kitchen sink, rinsing off the breakfast dishes, when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps that somehow felt official, final. I dried my hands on the towel and headed to the front door, expecting maybe a package or one of the neighbors asking to borrow something. Instead, I found a woman in a gray suit holding a manila envelope. "Robert Mitchell?" she asked. "That's me." She handed me the envelope. "You've been served. Have a good day, sir." I stood there on my porch in Bend, Oregon, watching her walk back to her car. And I knew. Before I even opened it, I knew my son Eric had finally made his move. Inside, my grandson Marcus was at the kitchen table doing his algebra homework. 14 years old, brown hair falling in his eyes the way teenage boys' hair always does, wearing that Blazers jersey I'd gotten him for Christmas. He looked up at me. "Who was that, Grandpa?" I folded the papers and slid them into my back pocket. "Nobody important, buddy.
How's that homework coming?"
But Marcus wasn't stupid. He'd inherited his grandmother's sharp eyes, God rest her soul. "Is it about my dad?" I sat down across from him. No point lying to the kid. We'd built our relationship on honesty for 12 years. "Yeah, it is." He went back to his homework, jaw tight. "What does he want?" "We'll figure it out together, I promise." That night, after Marcus went to bed, I finally read through the custody petition. Eric was suing for full custody of his son. The son he'd dropped off at my house when the boy was 2 years old, said he needed just a few weeks to get my head straight, and then didn't come back for 12 years. The petition was professionally done. Eric had a lawyer, a good one by the looks of it. The arguments were laid out in neat legal language. I was 68 years old, a widower, potentially unable to provide for the needs of an active teenage boy. Eric, on the other hand, was 39, remarried, stable. He'd turned his life around. He was ready to be a father. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, sitting at that same kitchen table where I'd taught Marcus to read, where we'd done 1,000 homework assignments together, where we'd eaten 1,000 dinners. Just me and him, ever since my wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Sarah. She'd been the one who insisted we keep all the paperwork. "Robert," she'd told me back in 2013, "I love our son, but he's not thinking straight. Get it in writing. Protect that baby." I'd thought she was being paranoid. Now I understood she was being smart. The next morning I called the only lawyer I knew, Frank Novak. We've gone to high school together, played on the same basketball team, and he'd handled Sarah's estate when she passed. He told me to come in that afternoon. "Marcus," I said over breakfast, "I need to run some errands today. You okay getting home from school on your own?" He looked at me over his cereal bowl. "This is about the custody thing, isn't it?" "Yeah." "Can I come with you?" "It's going to be boring legal stuff, bud." "Grandpa," he set down his spoon, "it's about me. I should be there." He was right, of course. He usually was. Frank's office was in one of those old brick buildings downtown, the kind that had been there since the 50s. He'd added some modern furniture, but the place still smelled like old paper and coffee, which I found comforting somehow. He read through Eric's petition while Marcus and I sat across from his desk. Finally, he looked up. "This is serious, Rob. Parental rights generally trump grandparent guardianship, even with a long absence." "Even when the parent abandoned the kid?" I could hear the anger in my voice. "The law calls it temporarily unable to provide care. Eric's lawyer is arguing he was going through a difficult period, but has since stabilized." Marcus spoke up. "What about what I want?" Frank looked at him with something like respect. You're 14. In Oregon, the court will definitely consider your preference, and at your age, it carries significant weight. But it's not the only factor. What do I need to do? I asked. Frank leaned back in his chair. Tell me everything. From the beginning. So I did. It was March 2013. Eric had shown up at my door with a toddler in his arms and a backpack full of clothes. He'd had Marcus with a girlfriend named Rachel, but Rachel had left when Marcus was 6 months old. Eric had been trying to do it alone, but he was 27, working as a line cook, living in a studio apartment, and he was drowning. Dad, I just need a couple weeks, he'd said, maybe a month. I need to get my head straight, find a better job, get a bigger place. I can't think straight with a crying kid all the time. Sarah had taken Marcus from his arms without a word. The baby had been wearing a diaper that needed changing and a onesie with stains on it. How long has it been since he ate? She'd asked. Eric had shrugged. Few hours, maybe? She'd given him a look that could freeze lava. Go get your head straight, Eric. We'll take care of your son. He'd left that same day. Didn't even stay for dinner. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 3 months. Sarah had started taking Marcus to his pediatrician appointments. We enrolled him in daycare so Sarah could go back to her teaching job. Eric would call every few weeks, always with a new excuse. He'd found a girl. They were trying to make it work. He'd lost his job. He was taking a class. He was moving to Seattle for a better opportunity. After 6 months, Sarah sat me down. We need to make this official. What do you mean? I mean, we need legal guardianship. What if something happens and we need to make medical decisions? What if we need to enroll him in school? We can't just have him here informally forever. She'd been right, as usual. So we'd contacted Eric, told him we needed to formalize things for Marcus's sake. And to my surprise, he'd agreed. We met at a lawyer's office, and Eric signed a statement that he was temporarily unable to provide adequate care and was granting us temporary guardianship for an indefinite period until I am able to resume parental responsibilities. Sarah had made him read it out loud before signing. I remember that. She wanted to make sure he understood what he was agreeing to. That was the last time I saw Eric in person until 3 weeks ago. He'd call occasionally over the years, birthdays, sometimes Christmas. Brief conversations where he'd ask how Marcus was doing, and I'd give him updates. He learned to ride a bike. He started kindergarten. He made the basketball team. Eric would say, "That's great, Dad," and promise to visit soon. And then we wouldn't hear from him for another 6 months. Marcus stopped asking about him around age 7. When Sarah died in 2022, Eric didn't come to the funeral. He sent flowers with a card that said, "Sorry for your loss, Dad." Marcus had looked at those flowers and said, "I barely remember Grandma was married to someone else before you, Grandpa." And I'd realized the kid didn't even really register Eric as his father anymore. I was the only parent he'd ever known. Sarah had left a life insurance policy. Not a fortune, but $500,000. It was in a trust for Marcus, accessible when he turned 18. She'd been a teacher for 30 years, always careful with money, and she wanted to make sure her grandson could go to college, buy a car, have a foundation to build his life on. I'd mentioned it to Eric in passing during one of his rare phone calls last year, just casual conversation. Sarah set up a trust for Marcus. He'll get it when he's 18. That's great, Dad. That's really great. How much? I'd told him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. 3 months ago, Eric called and said he wanted to come visit. Said he missed Marcus, wanted to reconnect. I was surprised, but cautiously optimistic. Maybe he'd finally grown up. Maybe better late than never. He showed up with a woman he introduced as his wife, Melissa. They stayed for a weekend. Melissa was nice enough, younger than Eric, worked as a dental hygienist. She and Eric had gotten married a year ago. They took Marcus out for dinner, went to one of his basketball games, tried to act like a normal family. Marcus was polite but distant. On Sunday evening, after they left, he came into the living room where I was watching TV. "Do you think he'll actually stay in touch this time?" "I don't know, bud. I don't need him to. I just want you to know that." I'd hugged him then, this kid who was almost as tall as me now, and felt grateful for every ordinary day we'd had together. 2 weeks later, the custody petition arrived. Frank listened to all of this, taking notes. Marcus sat quietly beside me, hearing some of these details for the first time. When I finished, Frank tapped his pen on his desk. "Do you still have that signed statement from 2013? "I do. Sarah kept everything. Medical records, school records, every receipt. She was meticulous." "Good. What about communication records? Texts, emails, phone logs?" "I've got 12 years of texts from Eric. Mostly him asking for money or making excuses for why he couldn't visit." Frank smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "Even better. Rob, I think we can fight this. But I need you to understand something. Eric has a strong case on paper. Biological father, claims to have reformed, married now with a stable home. The court defaults toward parental rights. We need to show a pattern of abandonment, not just temporary hardship. He's been gone 12 years. He'll argue he maintained contact, that he was waiting until he could provide a proper home." Marcus spoke up again. "What if I tell them I don't want to go?" Frank looked at him seriously. "That will matter. A lot. But Marcus, you need to understand what you'll be asked to do. You might have to testify in court. You might have to answer questions about your dad, about your grandfather, about your life. It might be uncomfortable." "I don't care. Grandpa's my family." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll take this one step at a time." But over the next few weeks, as Frank filed our response and started preparing our case, I began to realize this wasn't going to be simple. Eric's lawyer was aggressive. They filed motions, demanded home inspections, questioned whether I was physically capable of caring for a teenage boy at my age. They subpoenaed Marcus's school records, his medical files, even talked to his teachers and his basketball coach. I learned from Frank that Eric was claiming he'd been suffering from depression and anxiety back in 2013, that he'd left Marcus with me not out of irresponsibility, but because he was seeking treatment and wanted his son in a stable environment while he healed. He'd spent the years since building a career. He was a restaurant manager now, decent salary, and getting therapy. He was ready to be a father. It was all very reasonable sounding. It might have even been true. I didn't know anymore. What I did know was that for 12 years, he'd called maybe 6 times a year. He'd seen Marcus in person maybe 3 times total, usually for a few hours. He'd never paid child support. I'd never asked because I didn't need it, and honestly, I didn't want to give him an excuse to claim parental rights. He'd missed every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every school play, every basketball game except that one weekend visit. Frank built our case methodically. He documented every missed milestone. He got statements from Marcus's teachers about how I was the one who attended parent-teacher conferences, signed permission slips, volunteered for field trips. He got a letter from Marcus's pediatrician confirming I'd brought him to every appointment. He pulled phone records showing the sporadic nature of Eric's contact. And then he found something interesting. "Rob," he called me into his office one afternoon. I need you to look at something. He showed me Eric's social media. The accounts were semi-private, but Frank had an investigator who knew how to access them. They were photos from the past few years. Eric at expensive restaurants. Eric on vacation in Hawaii. Eric at concerts and sporting events. Not exactly the life of someone struggling to provide for a child.
When were these taken? I asked.
Over the past 3 years, after your wife died. After Sarah died. After Marcus would inherit the insurance money. Frank, do you think... I think your son heard about a $500,000 trust fund and suddenly discovered his paternal instincts. But I can't prove that in court. What I can prove is that he had the means to be involved in Marcus's life and chose not to be. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. Marcus asked me one night at dinner, "Are you scared?" "A little," I admitted. "Are you?" "Yeah, but Grandpa, even if the court says I have to go, I'm not going to forget you. You're my real dad." I had to leave the table for a minute after that. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I got up around midnight and went into the garage where Sarah had kept her files. Everything was still organized in labeled boxes: medical, school, legal, financial. I pulled down the legal box and opened it. There, right on top, was the statement Eric had signed in 2013. I read it again, Sarah's handwriting in the margin. "Make sure he reads it aloud, witnessed by attorney J. Morrison. May 15th, 2013. Below it was a folder of text messages Sarah had printed out. I'd forgotten about these. She'd made me save every text from Eric, then print them quarterly, just in case. I flipped through them. "Dad, can you send me $200? I'm short on rent." "Hey, sorry I missed Marcus's birthday, got tied up with work. Can't make it for Christmas, something came up. I know I said I'd visit, but Melissa and I are having problems." 12 years of broken promises, excuses, and requests for money. Never, "How is my son doing?" Never, "What does he need?" Just Eric. Always Eric. I found one more thing at the bottom of the box. An envelope addressed to me in Sarah's handwriting. I opened it, even though I knew I shouldn't, even though it felt like opening a letter from beyond the grave. "Robert," it said, "if you're reading this, I'm probably gone, and something's happened with Eric. I want you to know that you've been more of a father to Marcus than Eric ever was. Don't let anyone tell you different. The law might say Eric has rights, but rights mean nothing without responsibility. You've shown up every single day. That's what matters. I love you both. Sarah." I sat in that garage and cried for the first time since her funeral. The morning of the hearing, I put on my one good suit and helped Marcus with his tie. He'd wanted to wear one, said it would show the judge he was taking this seriously. We drove to the courthouse in silence. Frank met us outside. "Remember, let me do the talking unless you're directly addressed. Stay calm, stay factual. And Marcus, if they call you to testify, just tell the truth." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, rows of benches, the judge's bench up front. Eric was already there with his lawyer and Melissa. He was wearing a suit too, and he'd cut his hair short. He looked respectable, mature. He looked like someone who could be a good father. He didn't look at me or Marcus. The hearing started with Eric's lawyer presenting their case. She was good, I had to admit. She painted a picture of a young man who'd struggled with mental health, who'd made the difficult decision to temporarily place his son with family while he sought help, who'd maintained contact throughout, and who had now built a stable life and wanted to fulfill his responsibilities as a father. She showed photos of Eric and Melissa's house, a nice 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood.
She presented Eric's employment records, his salary, his therapist's letter confirming he'd completed treatment. She talked about the importance of the father-son bond, about how Marcus was approaching his teenage years and needed a male role model closer to his age who could understand modern challenges.
She made Eric sound like the hero of this story. Then it was Frank's turn. He started with the statement from 2013, the one Eric had signed. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this document, wherein Mr. Eric Mitchell agreed to relinquish care of his son for an indefinite period, while acknowledging he was unable to provide adequate care. This was not a temporary arrangement. This was a parent admitting he could not fulfill his responsibilities. Eric's lawyer objected, argued that the statement was made under duress, that Eric had been suffering from depression. Frank pulled out the text messages. Your Honor, these are communications between Mr. Robert Mitchell and his son Eric, spanning 12 years. I've highlighted several key patterns. First, the gaps in communication, often 4 to 6 months between contacts. Second, the nature of the contacts, often requests for financial assistance rather than inquiries about his son's well-being. Third, the broken promises, at least 15 instances where Eric committed to visiting and failed to appear. He projected them on a screen, one after another. The courtroom was silent, except for Frank's voice reading them aloud. Finally, Your Honor, I'd like to address the timing of this custody petition. Mr. Eric Mitchell showed minimal interest in his son's life for 12 years. He attended perhaps 3% of the child's school events, 0 medical appointments, and 0 parent-teacher conferences. He provided no financial support. And yet, 3 months after learning that his son would inherit $500,000 at age 18, he suddenly filed for custody. Eric's face went red. His lawyer stood up. Your Honor, that's a baseless accusation. Frank held up his hand. I'm not accusing Mr. Mitchell of anything. I'm simply noting the timeline. The court can draw its own conclusions. The judge, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked at Eric. Mr. Mitchell, would you like to respond to any of this? Eric stood up. Your Honor, I made mistakes. I was young, I was struggling, and I left my son with my parents because I thought it was best for him. But I've been in therapy. I've built a stable life. I'm married now. I have a home. I want to be a father to my son. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for a great deal, the judge said. But so does 12 years of absence. I'd like to hear from the child. Is Marcus Mitchell present? Marcus stood up, and I saw his hands shaking. Frank had prepared him for this, but knowing it might happen and having it happen were different things. Come up here, son, the judge said gently. Marcus walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down. He looked small up there, despite being 14 and 5'9". Marcus, the judge said, I know this is difficult. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer honestly. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Do you remember your father, Eric Mitchell? Not really. I remember he used to come by sometimes when I was little, but not much. And your grandfather, Robert Mitchell? He's raised me my whole life. Him and my grandma before she died. Tell me about your life with your grandfather. Marcus took a breath. Grandpa's been there for everything. He taught me to ride a bike. He comes to all my basketball games. He helps me with homework. When Grandma died, he made sure I was okay, even though he was sad too. He makes me breakfast every morning. He taught me to drive last year. He's my dad. What about Eric Mitchell? How do you feel about him? I don't really know him. He seems nice when he calls, but he never really calls. You came to visit once a few months ago, and it was weird. He doesn't know anything about me. If I awarded custody to your father, how would you feel?" Marcus's voice cracked. "I'd feel like I was being punished."
Grandpa didn't do anything wrong. He's been perfect. Why would I have to leave him?
Eric's lawyer tried to redirect, asked Marcus if he thought he might grow to love his father, given time, if he understood that people could change, if he wanted a chance to have a complete family with a mother and father. Marcus looked her right in the eye. "I had a complete family, Grandpa and Grandma, and now I have Grandpa. That's enough." The judge called a recess. Frank, Marcus and I went to a conference room down the hall. Marcus was shaking, and I hugged him. "You did great, bud."
I felt like I was going to throw up.
"You held it together. I'm proud of you." Frank was reviewing his notes. "The judge is taking this seriously. That's good. But I need you to be prepared, Rob. This could still go either way." When we returned to the courtroom, the judge called me to the stand. Frank walked me through my 12 years with Marcus. The daily routines, the sacrifices, the joys.
I talked about teaching him to fish, about sitting in the ER when he broke his arm at age 8, about watching him grow from a confused toddler into a remarkable young man. Then Eric's lawyer cross-examined me. "Mr. Mitchell, you're 68 years old, correct?" "Yes." "And you're raising an active 14-year-old boy alone?" "That's correct." "Isn't it true that you've had some health issues? A heart procedure last year?" "A stent, routine, I'm fine." "But you're not getting any younger. What happens when Marcus is 16, 17, and you're 70? Can you keep up with him?" "I've kept up with him for 12 years. I plan to keep going." "Wouldn't Marcus benefit from having a younger father? Someone who can relate to modern teenager challenges?" I looked at her, then at the judge. "Your Honor, I may be 68, but I know my grandson. I know he's worried about his algebra grade. I know he has a crush on a girl named Emma in his English class.
I know he wants to try out for varsity basketball next year. I know he's scared of the dark sometimes, but won't admit it. I know how to make him laugh when he's sad. That's not about age. That's about showing up every single day." The courtroom was quiet. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Robert Mitchell, let me ask you something. If I were to award custody to Eric Mitchell, with visitation rights for you, what would you do?" "I'd accept the court's decision, Your Honor. But I'd fight for as much visitation as possible, because that boy is my grandson, and I love him." "And if Eric Mitchell were to allow you to retain custody?" "I'd raise Marcus the same way I've been raising him. I'd make sure he grows up knowing his father didn't abandon him twice, but rather made a difficult choice to let him stay in a stable home. I'd never speak ill of Eric to Marcus. But I'd also make damn sure, excuse me, Your Honor, I'd make very sure that Marcus knows what consistency looks like." The judge sat back. "Thank you. You may step down." She looked at both lawyers. "I'm going to take a short recess to review the evidence. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes for my decision." Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Marcus and I sat on a bench outside the courtroom. He leaned against me, and I put my arm around him. "Whatever happens," I said, "we're going to be okay. Promise?" "Promise." When we went back in, the judge had her decision written out. She put on her reading glasses and looked at all of us. "I've reviewed all the evidence, heard the testimony, and considered the applicable law. This is not an easy case. Parental rights are fundamental, and the court does not take them lightly.
Eric Mitchell has, by his own admission, been absent from his son's life for 12 years. However, he has maintained some contact and he has made efforts to reform his life. That said, this court's primary concern is the best interest of the child.
Marcus Mitchell is 14 years old. He has expressed a clear preference to remain with his grandfather. More importantly, Robert Mitchell has provided stable, loving care for 12 years. He has been the child's primary caregiver, attending to all physical, emotional, and educational needs. The court notes the suspicious timing of Mr. Eric Mitchell's custody petition, coming shortly after he learned of the trust fund established for Marcus. While I cannot definitively conclude that financial motives are at play, the timing is concerning. However, the court also notes that Eric Mitchell is the biological father and has legal rights. Therefore, I am not terminating his parental rights. Instead, I am awarding primary physical custody to Robert Mitchell, with supervised visitation rights to Eric Mitchell. These visits will occur monthly for the next year, after which we will review the arrangement. Furthermore, the trust fund established by Sarah Mitchell shall remain under the control of Robert Mitchell as trustee until Marcus reaches 18, at which point it will transfer to Marcus directly. Eric Mitchell shall have no access to or control over these funds. Mr. Eric Mitchell, let me be clear. You have been given a second chance to be part of your son's life. Do not waste it. If you fail to appear for scheduled visits, or if there is any evidence that your interest in Marcus is financially motivated, I will not hesitate to terminate your visitation rights entirely. Mr. Robert Mitchell, this court recognizes and commends your dedication to your grandson. Continue the excellent work you've been doing. Marcus, I know this has been difficult. You're a brave young man, and you should be proud of how you handled yourself today. She banged her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. I don't remember walking out of the courthouse. I don't remember getting to the car. I remember Marcus hugging me in the parking lot, both of us crying, and Frank standing nearby giving us space but smiling. Eric and Melissa were walking to their car. He looked over at us once, and I saw something in his face. Anger, shame, regret, I couldn't tell. Then they got in and drove away. That night, Marcus and I ordered pizza and watched a basketball game on TV, just like we did every Friday. Everything was normal, and nothing would ever be the same. A week later, Marcus asked me at breakfast, "Do you think my dad will actually show up for the visits?" "I don't know, bud." "Do you think he really wanted me, or just the money?" I set down my coffee cup. "I think people are complicated. I think your dad might have convinced himself he wanted you. But Marcus, here's what I know for sure. I want you. Not because of money or obligation or anything else. Just because you're you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." He nodded and went back to his cereal. A month later, Eric missed his first scheduled visit. He texted an excuse about work. The second visit, he showed up 30 minutes late. The third visit, he didn't come at all. 6 months after the hearing, I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Melissa. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted you to know that Eric and I are getting divorced. He became obsessed with the idea of that money, and when the judge blocked him from it, he changed. I realized he never really wanted to be a father. He wanted to be wealthy. I'm sorry for the part I played in this. Marcus is lucky to have you." I showed Marcus the text. He read it and handed my phone back. "Grandpa?" "Yeah, bud?" "Can we just have a normal Friday? Pizza and basketball?" "Absolutely."
We never heard from Eric again after that. He stopped showing up for visits, stopped calling. It was like those 12 years of minimal contact had been the anomaly, and he'd returned to his default state, absent. Marcus is 17 now.
Next year he'll go to college. He's looking at University of Oregon, wants to study engineering. The trust fund will help pay for it, and I'll be there on move-in day, embarrassing him probably, taking too many pictures, definitely. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry at Eric. I'm not really. I'm grateful. He gave me the greatest gift of my life, even if he didn't mean to. He gave me Marcus. And Marcus? He knows now that biology doesn't make family. Love does. Consistency does. Showing up does. Sarah was right about everything. She always was. Last week, Marcus asked if he could legally change his last name to Mitchell. So it's clear, he said, that you're my real dad. I told him he'd always been a Mitchell where it counted. But yeah, we could make it official. He starts filling out college applications next month. I've already got a folder ready, labeled, organized, everything documented. Old habits die hard. And somewhere out there, Eric is living his life, free from the responsibility he never wanted. I hope he's happy. I genuinely do. Because I am.